Chapter 1 The fog rolled into Port Blossom as if it owned the place, a thick, wet beast that swallowed the coastline and crept inland to muffle the world in a shroud of gray. It clung to the pines, dripped from the eaves of salt-bleached houses, and deadened the cry of gulls to a distant, mournful echo. It was a town drowning in quiet, and I, Alex, had washed up on its shore, just as desperate and adrift. For 3 weeks, my world had shrunk to the size of my dwindling savings and the 4 peeling walls of a rented room above a bait and tackle shop. The air tasted of brine and diesel. Every dollar spent was a countdown timer to another failure, another town I'd have to leave behind with nothing but the clothes on my back and the ghost of a memory I couldn't shake, the screech of tires, the impossible spiderweb crack of a windshield. I needed a job. Any job. That's when I saw it. Tucked between a shuttered bakery and a maritime antique store, there was a shop front that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The sign above, in elegant but faded script, read, "Reflections Eternal." Below it, a small, hand-painted card was taped to the inside of the glass door, "Help Wanted." Curiosity, or maybe just the sheer lack of any other option, pulled me forward. The windows were crammed with mirrors. Not the clean, sterile kind you'd find in a department store, but mirrors that looked heavy with history. There were oval ones in tarnished silver frames, long, narrow ones that could have hung in the hall of a forgotten manor, and small, pocket-sized looking glasses with frames of bone or dark, carved wood. They didn't just reflect the foggy street, they seemed to drink it in, holding distorted, silent versions of the world within their depths. The shop smelled of dust and something sharp, like metal left out in the rain. A small bell chimed a discordant note as I pushed the door open. Inside, the feeling of being watched was immediate and overwhelming. Mirrors lined every conceivable surface, angled in a way that created a disorienting, infinite labyrinth of my own reflection. I saw myself from a dozen angles at once, a tired, 25-year-old with a worn jacket, perpetually anxious eyes, and hair that hadn't seen a proper cut in months. "Can I help you?" The voice was dry, like rustling leaves. It came from a shadowed alcove behind a large, imposing counter. A man emerged, unfolding himself from a tall-backed chair. He was gaunt, his frame a collection of sharp angles beneath a tailored but threadbare suit. His face was pale and oblong, dominated by eyes so dark they seemed to have no pupils, like polished obsidian. He looked less like a shopkeeper and more like an undertaker who had misplaced his hearse. I saw the sign, I stammered, my voice feeling small in the cavernous silence. "The Help Wanted" sign. He glided towards me, his movements unnervingly smooth. "We have had a vacancy for some time." He stopped a few feet away, his gaze analytical, as if he were measuring me for a frame. "This is not a job for everyone. It requires diligence. A respect for the items." "I'm a hard worker," I said, the line feeling hollow and rehearsed. "I'm desperate. I mean, I'm reliable." A thin, bloodless smile touched his lips. "Desperation has its uses. It encourages obedience." He gestured a long, pale hand towards the shop's interior. "This is my collection. My life's work. I am Mr. Varnholt. Alex." I offered a hand, a gesture he completely ignored. "Alex," he repeated, the name sounding alien in his mouth. He looked me over one last time. "The work is simple. Dusting. Polishing. Assisting the rare customer. And, most importantly, following the rules." "Rules?" Mr. Varnholt turned and retrieved a small, yellowed piece of cardstock from a drawer behind the counter. It was covered in spidery, ink-black handwriting. "There are 8, he said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "They are not suggestions. They are the terms of employment. Non-negotiable." He handed me the note. I glanced down, expecting a list of mundane tasks. What I read sent a strange, cold prickle across my skin. My desperation, however, was a stronger force than my unease. "I can follow rules," I said, trying to sound confident. Mr. Varnholt's smile didn't reach his glassy eyes. "Excellent," he said. "You can start tomorrow. Be here at 9 a.m. sharp." He turned and retreated back to his shadowed alcove, a clear dismissal. As I walked out, the discordant bell chiming my departure, I couldn't resist one last look in the nearest mirror, a large, simple square of modern glass. My reflection stood there, looking as relieved and unnerved as I felt. But as I turned my head to leave, I could have sworn it smiled, a fraction of a second after I did. Chapter 2. The next morning, the fog was so dense it felt like walking through a dream. Port Blossom was a town of ghosts. I arrived at Reflections Eternal at 8:55 a.m. to find the door unlocked. The shop was even darker than I remembered, the only illumination coming from a few low-wattage bulbs that cast long, dancing shadows. The mirrors waited, silent and cold. Mr. Varnholt was already there, standing in the center of the main room as if he had never left. "Punctuality is a virtue," he said without turning. "It shows respect." My first day was a tutorial in the bazaar. Mr. Varnholt didn't teach me how to use a cash register or handle inventory. Instead, he taught me the shop's rituals. "Dusting is done with these," he said, producing a set of soft, black lamb's wool cloths. "Never a feather duster. It can stir things." He then showed me the polish. It wasn't Windex or any commercial cleaner. It was a thick, milky substance in an unlabeled apothecary bottle. It had a strange, faintly sweet smell, like almonds and decay. "This is the only substance you will use to clean the glass," he instructed, his voice low and serious. "It pacifies them. Water would be an agitation." The most unnerving part of the orientation was the tour. He led me through the labyrinthine aisles, pointing out specific mirrors. "This one," he said, gesturing to a rococo piece with a frame of gilded, writhing cherubs, "is from the court of a mad king. It has seen things that would curdle your thoughts." He ran a finger along the frame, careful not to touch the glass. "The antique pieces are not to be touched with bare skin. The cold, you see. It lingers." He led me to a dim back room, where a single, enormous oval mirror leaned against the far wall. It was covered by a heavy, velvet cloth the color of a starless night sky. The air around it felt heavy, colder, and this, he said, his voice barely a whisper, "is never to be sold. It is not for sale. It is not for viewing. You will not uncover it. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," I managed, my eyes fixed on the shrouded shape. Back at the counter, he tapped a long finger on the crumpled note of rules I still had clutched in my hand. "Memorize them," he commanded. "They are your shield here. They are the only thing that will keep you safe." I spent the rest of the day in a state of suspended disbelief, carefully dusting ornate frames and polishing modern surfaces with the strange, milky fluid. The shop was silent, save for the creak of my own footsteps on the ancient floorboards. No customers came. It was just me, Mr. Varnholt lurking in his shadowy corner, and the hundreds of silent, watching eyes of the mirrors that I reread the list of rules until the ink seemed to burn into my memory. Never look into a mirror after closing time, midnight. If you catch your reflection after hours, something else might look back, and it will follow you. Do not touch the antique mirrors with bare hands. Their surfaces are unnaturally cold, and skin contact may trap a piece of you inside. That if a mirror shows a reflection that isn't yours, cover it immediately with the black cloth from the storeroom. Do not look at it again until sunrise. Never sell the large, oval mirror in the back room, no matter how much a customer offers. It's not for sale, and it's not what it seems. If you hear a whisper from a mirror, do not respond. Acknowledging it gives it power, and it will try to learn your name. Always lock the front door at exactly 6 p.m., even if a customer is still inside. Those who stay past closing belong to the mirrors.do not clean the mirrors with water or glass cleaner. Use only the special polish provided by Mr. Varnholt, or you'll awaken what's trapped inside. That if you see a mirror with no reflection at all, leave the shop immediately and do not return until the next day. It means the entity is watching. That IT was madness. A prank for the new hire. And yet, the sheer gravity with which Mr. Varnholt spoke, the oppressive atmosphere of the shop, a part of me, the part that had seen the impossible crack of a windshield and the life drain from a face, whispered that some rules weren't meant to be broken. Chapter 3. A week passed. The rhythm of the shop was a slow, hypnotic dirge. I'd arrive, dust, polish, and stand behind the counter, watching the fog ebb and flow outside. Customers were rare, spectral figures who would drift in, gaze at the mirrors with a kind of vacant longing, and then drift out again without a word. I sold only 2 items, a small, steel-framed vanity mirror and a pocket-looking glass. Mr. Varnholt handled the transactions in near silence. The initial shock of the rules began to wear off, replaced by a dull, monotonous routine. I started to think Mr. Varnholt was just an eccentric old man with a flair for the dramatic. The shop was creepy, sure, but it was a paying job. My skepticism, a stubborn weed, was beginning to grow back. That IT happened on a Tuesday. I was in the west wing of the shop, a narrow corridor lined with Victorian-era pier glasses. They were tall and imposing, their frames dark with age. I was carefully polishing one with the milky fluid when my hand slipped. To steady myself, my bare fingers brushed against the surface of the adjacent mirror. Rule number 2. Do not touch the antique mirrors with bare hands. The cold was instantaneous and shocking. It wasn't the normal coolness of glass, it was a deep, penetrating cold that felt like plunging my hand into a bucket of ice water. It seemed to suck the warmth from my very bones. I snatched my hand back with a gasp, a tingling numbness spreading through my fingertips. For a moment, I thought I saw something shift in the reflection, a flicker of movement in the background that wasn't there. But when I blinked, it was gone. That I stood there for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at my hand. It was pale, the skin slightly mottled, but otherwise looked normal. The feeling of cold slowly subsided, replaced by a pins and needles sensation. I told myself it was my imagination, a psychosomatic response to Varnholt's spooky rules. I finished my work, my earlier complacency shattered. The rest of the day, I felt on edge. The silence of the shop seemed heavier, the reflections in the mirrors sharper, more mocking. I kept glancing at my hand, flexing my fingers, trying to shake the memory of that gelid touch. At 5:55 p.m., Mr. Varnholt emerged from his alcove. "It is time to close, Alex," he said. "Yes, sir." I tidied the counter, my movements stiff. As I was getting my jacket, I glanced at a simple, modern mirror hanging by the door. It was a habit, a final check before facing the world. My reflection looked back at me, pale, tired. I turned to go, and my reflection didn't. For a horrifying, stomach-lurching half-second, my body turned towards the door while the image in the mirror remained perfectly still, its eyes locked on me. Then, with a snap that was more felt than heard, it jerked into sync with my own movement. That I froze, my hand on the doorknob. I slowly turned back to the mirror. My reflection mimicked me perfectly now. It was just me. Just my face, my fear. Had I imagined it? The strain of the day, the weird rules, the cold glass, it had to be a trick of the light, of a mind primed for terror. That I didn't say anything to Mr. Varnholt. What could I say? My reflection has a mind of its own. He'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was. That I fled the shop, the dissonant chime of the bell chasing me out into the damp, foggy embrace of the evening. All the way back to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't left the shop alone. I avoided my own gaze in shop windows, in the darkened screen of my phone. When I finally reached my apartment, I walked into the bathroom and taped a towel over the mirror above the sink. I didn't want to see what might be looking back. Chapter 4, Sleep offered no escape. It was a tapestry of fractured images, endless corridors of mirrors reflecting a distorted, screaming face that was almost mine, the bone-deep cold spreading from my hand up my arm, the screech of tires on wet pavement. I woke up with my heart pounding, the sheets twisted around my legs. The towel was still taped over my bathroom mirror. The fear was real. The next day, I returned to Reflections Eternal with a new, gnawing dread. The job that had been a lifeline now felt like a noose. My every movement was tentative. I gave the antique mirrors a wide berth. I felt their presence like a low-frequency hum just at the edge of hearing. My paranoia grew with each passing hour. I'd catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I'd turn, it was just the play of light on 1,000 polished surfaces. A book left on the counter would be mysteriously squared to the edge when I looked back. The faint, sweet smell of the polish seemed to cling to me, even after I left the shop. The out-of-sync reflection was no longer a one-time event. It happened again, just once, a tiny, almost imperceptible lag in a small hand mirror I was putting back on a shelf. It was enough that I couldn't quit. The thought was a brief, tantalizing fantasy, but my bank account was a harsh realist. I needed the money. But I also needed answers. If I was going crazy, I needed to know. And if I wasn't, I needed to know what I was dealing with. On my lunch break, I walked through the misty streets to the Port Blossom Public Library. It was a stout brick building that smelled of old paper and floor wax, a bastion of quiet normalcy in the strange town. A woman with kind eyes and hair the color of salt and pepper sat at the main desk, a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose. A small, brass plaque read, "Clara Brewster, head librarian. Can I help you, dear?" she asked, her voice warm. "I hope so," I said, leaning on the counter. "I'm trying to find some information about a local business. An old one. It's called Reflections Eternal." Clara's warm smile faltered. It was a subtle shift, a tightening around her eyes, a slight stiffening of her shoulders. She took off her glasses and began polishing them with a cloth. "The old mirror shop," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "What about it?" "I'm just curious about its history. When it opened, who's owned it? That sort of thing." I didn't mention I worked there. I didn't want to be marked as one of Varnholt's. She avoided my gaze, her attention fixed on her spectacles. "It's been here a long time. Longer than most. Mr. Varnholt has been the proprietor for as long as I can remember. Do you have any old town records? Newspapers, maybe?" She hesitated for a moment longer, then seemed to reach a decision. "The town archives are on microfilm. In the back. I can show you how to use the reader." Her reluctance was a blaring alarm bell. She knew something. As she led me to the clunky, beige microfilm machine, she spoke in a low voice. "Port Blossom is an old town. Some places, they accumulate stories. The mirror shop has more than most. Be careful what you go looking for. Sometimes it's better not to know." Her warning was like a splash of gasoline on the embers of my fear. It confirmed that this wasn't just in my head. There was a history here. A dark one. Chapter 5, the microfilm reader hummed and clicked, spooling through decades of Port Blossom's history. I scrolled past grainy photographs of fishing tournaments, mayoral elections, and 4th of July parades. The world outside the shop seemed so mundane, so blissfully normal that I started my search with the shop's name. After nearly an hour, I found it, a small article in the Port Blossom Beacon from 1958. Reflections Eternal opens on Main Strata. New purveyor of fine-looking glasses and mirrors, Mr. Alastair Varnholt, has opened a unique establishment at the former site of the town's first chapel. Reflections Eternal promises to offer wares of unparalleled quality and distinction, from modern designs to antiques of European origin. A welcome addition to our town's commercial landscape, the former site of the town's first chapel. The detail snagged in my mind. An abandoned church was one thing, but building a mirror shop on consecrated ground felt intentional. Sinister that I kept scrolling, moving forward through the years. The shop was rarely mentioned. It was just a silent fixture of the town. Then, in 1976, I found something else. It wasn't a headline, just a small notice in the local news section. Local man reported MISSNG Samuel Jones, 22, was reported missing by his family 2 days ago. Jones was last seen leaving his place of employment at Reflections Eternal on Main Street. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Port Blossom Sheriff's Department. My blood ran cold. A past employee who vanished. I frantically scrolled forward. Weeks, months, years. There was no follow-up article. No mention of Samuel Jones ever being found. He had simply disappeared. My hands were shaking as I spooled through another decade. In 1991, another small brief. Concern for Women's WHRABUTS authorities are seeking information regarding the whereabouts of Eleanor Vance, 31, who has not been seen for over a week. Vance, a recent transplant to Port Blossom, was an employee at the Reflections Eternal Mirror Shop. Like Samuel Jones, Eleanor Vance was never mentioned again. She had been erased from the town's history, another ghost haunting the microfilm. 2 employees, decades apart, both vanishing from the same job. My job. That I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a creepy shop run by an eccentric. It was a trap. As I was rewinding the spool, Clara appeared at my elbow. She glanced at the screen, then at my pale face. Her own expression was one of grim pity. Find what you were looking for, she asked softly. I just nodded, unable to speak. Some mirrors don't just show you what's there, she said, her voice a near whisper. Some of them show you what they want. They're hungry. That place, it's hungry. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You're the first person to ask about that place in a long, long time. If you're smart, you'll be the last. Just, do your job, take the money, and don't get curious. Don't look too close. I left the library and stepped back into the fog, the librarian's words echoing in my mind. It was too late. I had already looked too close. And something was looking back. Chapter 6, armed with the knowledge of Samuel Jones and Eleanor Vance, my fear solidified into a constant, low-grade terror. The shop was no longer just a collection of objects, it was a mausoleum. Every mirror held the potential for a grim revelation. Whose faces had they reflected before they were lost? Did a piece of them remain trapped behind the glass? As rule number 2 hinted, the job became a tightrope walk over a pit of shadows. I became a zealot for the rules. I measured my movements, my glances. The special polish felt like a sacrament, the black cloths like holy vestments in a dark, inverted religion. The test of my newfound piety came on a Friday evening. The fog outside was particularly thick, pressing against the shop windows like a physical weight. It was 5:58 p.m. I was at the counter, counting the seconds until I could lock the door and escape. The bell above the door chimed. A man stepped inside, shaking the damp from his coat. He was nondescript, middle-aged, in a beige raincoat, with a tired face. He offered a polite nod and began to browse. I watched the clock on the wall. 5:59. Can I help you find anything? I asked, my voice tight. We're closing in just a minute. Just looking, he said, his back to me. He was standing in front of a series of convex mirrors, his reflection warping and swelling. The second hand on the clock swept upwards. It was 6:00 p.m., rule number 6. Always lock the front door at exactly 6 p.m., even if a customer is still inside. Those who stay past closing belong to the mirrors. My heart hammered. This had to be an exaggeration, a scare tactic. I couldn't just lock a man in the shop. It was insane. It was probably illegal. I opened my mouth to give him a final, more forceful warning, but then I thought of Samuel Jones. I thought of Eleanor Vance. I thought of my own reflection, moving when I didn't, that I looked from the man to Mr. Varnholt, who was standing in his usual alcove, his face an unreadable mask of shadow. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was an order. My hand trembled as I reached for the heavy brass lock on the door. The man was still engrossed, staring into a mirror that made his head look tiny and his body enormous. With a deep breath that felt like a betrayal of common decency, I turned the key. The lock clicked into place with a sound that seemed to echo with horrifying finality that I didn't dare look back at the customer. I scurried to the back room to grab my jacket, my mind screaming. What was I supposed to do now? Wait for Mr. Varnholt to let him out? Confront him? When I emerged from the back room less than a minute later, my jacket clutched in my fist, the shop was empty, the man in the beige coat was gone. I scanned the entire room, my eyes darting into every corner, every aisle. There was nowhere to hide. The back room had no other exit. He couldn't have left. The door was still locked. He had simply vanished. I looked at Mr. Varnholt. He was polishing a small hand mirror with a black cloth, his movements calm and methodical. He didn't acknowledge the disappearance. He didn't acknowledge anything. Good night, Alex, he said, his voice as dry as ever. Do remember to be on time tomorrow. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers numb, and stumbled out into the night. Had the man been real at all? Or was he a projection? A test? The thought was terrifying. Those who stay past closing belong to the mirrors. Had I just condemned a man, or had I simply witnessed the shop tidying itself up for the night? Chapter 7, the incident with the vanishing customer shredded the last of my denial. The shop was a predator, and I was working inside its mouth. My nights were sleepless, my days a blur of hypervigilance. I started talking to myself, whispering the rules under my breath like a mantra. Don't touch. Lock the door. Never look after midnight. My work suffered. I'd spend long minutes staring into the middle distance, jumping at the slightest creak of the floorboards. Mr. Varnholt watched me, his obsidian eyes revealing nothing. His silence was more unnerving than any reprimand. It was during one of these tense, quiet afternoons that the next rule was tested. I was in the deepest part of the shop, a section of modern, minimalist mirrors, where the reflections were stark and unforgiving. The air was still and heavy. Then I heard it was faint, almost imperceptible, like the sound of a breath being let out right next to my ear. Hey Alex, I froze, the polishing cloth falling from my hand. It was a whisper, thin and sibilant. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the air itself, from the cold glass surrounding me. Rule number 5. If you hear a whisper from a mirror, do not respond. Acknowledging it gives it power, and it will try to learn your name. It already knew my name. My blood turned to ice. I squeezed my eyes shut, my fists clenching. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge it. It's not real. Where did you go, Alex? The whisper hissed, closer this time. It sounded like a dry, rustling sound, like sand being poured over silk. The windshield, it looked so pretty, didn't it? A spiderweb for the FLY. My breath caught in my throat. The car accident. The memory I fought to keep buried, the one that haunted my waking moments and fueled my nightmares. The shattering glass, the look in her eyes, how could it know that? Tears pricked at my eyes. A sob built in my chest. I wanted to scream, to yell at it to leave me alone. The urge was a physical force, a pressure building in my skull. I bit down on my lip, hard, the sharp tang of blood filling my mouth. The pain was an anchor. We know you, Alex, the whisper continued, coiling around me like smoke. We know what you lost. We can show her to you again. Just ask." The temptation was a sharp, brutal hook. To see her again, just for a second, I shook my head violently, my eyes still screwed shut. No. It's a trick. It's the shop. It's the mirrors that I focused on the pain in my lip, on the feeling of the rough floorboards beneath my shoes. I refused to give it anything. I stood there, trapped in a silent, screaming battle with an unseen tormentor. After what felt like an eternity, the presence receded. The air lightened. The feeling of being watched lessened, though it didn't disappear entirely. I slowly opened my eyes. The mirrors showed only my own reflection, a pale, terrified person, a smear of blood on their lower lip that I had survived. I hadn't responded. But the victory felt hollow. It knew my name. And it knew my deepest pain. It had a weapon to use against me now. Chapter 8. I practically ran from the shop at 6 o'clock, not even waiting for Mr. Varnholt's dismissal. The fog had returned with a vengeance, so thick I could barely see the end of the street. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every muffled sound from the harbor felt like a pursuing footstep. As I rounded the corner onto my street, a figure emerged from the gloom. It was an old man, stooped and wiry, wrapped in a collection of mismatched coats despite the mild chill. He clutched a gnarled wooden cane. His eyes, rheumy and wild, fixed on me. It was the town eccentric I'd seen muttering to himself on occasion. "Old man Tucker," he pointed a shaky finger at me. "You work there," he rasped, his voice thick with a mixture of fear and accusation. "In the glass-eyed place." I tried to walk past him, but he shuffled to block my path. "They see you," he hissed, leaning closer. He smelled of salt and stale liquor. "They watch. Once they got your shape, they don't let go. I seen it. Back in '76. Saw poor Sammy Jones go in, but I never saw him come out. Just his echo. His echo." I whispered, my voice trembling, in the glass. Tucker's eyes widened. Just for a second. His face, screaming. No sound. "The mirrors, they eat you. They eat you slow, from the inside out." He looked me up and down, a flicker of something like pity in his frantic gaze. "You got the look. The look of a fly that's already touched the web. You run. You run now, before your reflection is all that's left." He then shuffled away, disappearing back into the fog as quickly as he had appeared, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, his words echoing the librarian's warnings. That I made it back to my small, grim apartment, the lock on the door feeling like a flimsy deterrent against a threat that didn't need a door to get in. The towel was still taped over the bathroom mirror. But the shop had followed me home anyway. I could feel it. A cold spot in the center of the room. The distinct, faint scent of almonds and decayed gaze fell on the window. Against the dark, foggy night, it had become a perfect, black mirror. I could see my own reflection clearly, my pale face, the wildness in my eyes. I looked just like old man Tucker. I stared, mesmerized by my own terror. And as I watched, my reflection slowly, deliberately, raised a hand and pressed its fingers against the glass from the other side. It smiled then, not my smile, but a wide, predatory grin that promised horrors beyond my comprehension. I saw past my own face, into the reflection of my room behind me. And in the reflection, standing right behind my real body, was a tall, gaunt shadow, a shape of a man with eyes like polished obsidian. I whirled around with a strangled cry. There was nothing there. I was alone in the room. I whipped my head back to the window. The reflection was normal again. Just me. Alone. Trembling. My heart felt like it was going to burst through my ribs. The line between the shop and my life, between reflection and reality, had been erased. I was no longer an employee. I was a part of the collection. And the true horrors had only just begun. Chapter 9, the reflection in the window, my reflection, but not, had broken something within me. The fragile barrier between the shop's madness and my own life had been shattered. I spent the night huddled in a corner of my room, a kitchen knife clutched in my hand, watching the window until the gray light of dawn finally diluted the glass back to transparency. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. Returning to reflections eternal felt less like a choice and more like a moth returning to a flame. It was the source of my terror, but it was also the only place I might find answers. To run, as Tucker had urged, felt impossible. Where would I go? The entity knew my name, it knew my past, and its shadow had already fallen across my apartment. It was inside my head. Fleeing would be like trying to outrun my own skull. My work became a parody of diligence. My hands shook as I polished the glass, my eyes darting nervously from one reflective surface to another. I'd flinch at the creak of a floorboard, at the groan of the old building settling. Every mirror was an ambush waiting to happen. The shop, once silent, now seemed to hum with a malevolent energy, a low thrum that vibrated in my teeth. Alex's mental state was a fraying rope. My reflection became my enemy. I'd catch it in a mirror, and for a split second, its expression would be one of contempt, of pity. Its eyes would hold a knowing gleam that wasn't mine. I started wearing a hooded sweatshirt, pulling the hood low to obscure my face, trying to deny the mirrors their prized demar. Varnholt watched my deterioration with an unnerving, clinical detachment. He said nothing about my sloppiness, my trembling hands, or the dark circles that bruised the skin beneath my eyes. His silence was a form of pressure, a quiet expectation. He was waiting for me to break. The shop was actively toying with me now. A display of small, silver-backed hand mirrors would be rearranged into a perfect spiral when my back was turned. The sweet, cloying scent of the polish would suddenly intensify in one corner of the room, thick and suffocating, before dissipating just as quickly. The horror was no longer passive. It was learning, testing, playing. And I was its only toy. Chapter 10, it was a rain-swept afternoon. The shop was dim, the light outside a perpetual twilight. I was working in a section dedicated to Art Deco mirrors, all sharp angles, chrome, and stark, unforgiving glass. My paranoia was a constant companion, a whisper in my own mind that echoed the sibilant voice from the mirrors that I was cleaning a large, octagonal mirror when I saw it wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a trick of the light. In the reflection, standing right behind me, was a young man. He was maybe 22, with the shaggy hair and wide, hopeful eyes of the 1970s. He wore a simple work shirt. His face was pale, his expression one of confusion and dawning horror. It was the face from the microfilm, the face of Samuel Jones, rule number 3. If a mirror shows a reflection that isn't yours, cover it immediately with the black cloth from the storeroom. Do not look at it again until sunrise. My heart seized. I should have turned, run, grabbed the cloth. But I was frozen, pinned by the impossible sight. The reflection of Samuel Jones wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, into the reflected depths of the shop, as if searching for an escape. He raised a hand, his movements slow and dreamlike, and pressed it against the glass from the inside. His mouth opened, forming a silent scream, then, his head snapped around. His eyes, his reflected eyes, locked with mine. The confusion in his expression curdled into a look of terrifying, accusatory recognition. He knew me. He knew I could see him. The connection broke me from my paralysis. I let out a strangled gasp and stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. I scrambled away, crab-walking across the dusty floor, my eyes still fixed on the mirror. The image of Samuel Jones remained, his gaze boring into me, his silent scream stretching his face into a mask of agony. That I forced myself to my feet and ran, not for the front door, but for the storeroom. My mind was a blizzard of panic, but the rule was a single, hard point of light, cover it. I fumbled through the cluttered storeroom, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grab the heavy, black velvet cloth. When I returned, heart hammering, the reflection was gone. The mirror showed only me, a pathetic, terrified figure clutching a black shroud. But the air where he had stood was cold, a pocket of absolute zero that felt like a wound in the world. With a sob, I threw the cloth over the mirror. It clung to the surface as if magnetized. I didn't need to look again. The image of his screaming face was burned onto the inside of my eyelids that I had looked. I had hesitated, and in that moment of horrified curiosity, I had broken the rule. A door had been opened, and I had the sickening feeling that I had just invited something new and terrible into my life. That night, I didn't just dream of the car crash. I dreamed I was a passenger in Samuel Jones's car, and the thing behind the wheel had no face. Chapter 11, the vision of Samuel Jones was the final push I needed. This was beyond paranoia, it was an assault. The next morning, running on nothing but fear and caffeine, I stormed into the Port Blossom Public Library. Clara was at her desk, stamping books. She looked up as I approached, and the professional warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by alarm. She must have seen the ragged desperation on my face. "Alex," she said, her voice low. "You look terrible." "I need your help," I said, my voice cracking. I leaned over the desk, my hands gripping the polished wood. "I work there, Clara. At Reflections Eternal. I took the job." The admission hung in the air between us. Clara's face went pale. She glanced around the quiet library, as if the walls themselves might be listening. She quickly came around the desk and guided me by the elbow to a small, secluded reading nook in the corner. "Are you insane?" she hissed, her earlier kindness replaced by a raw, palpable fear. "You don't just take a job there. People don't just work for Varnholt." "I didn't know," I pleaded. I was desperate. "But things are happening. I saw him. Samuel Jones. In one of the mirrors." Clara flinched as if I'd struck her. "You have to quit. Leave this town and never look back. It's too late." I snapped, my control fracturing. "It followed me home. It knows things about me. Quitting won't stop it. I need to know what it is. What that place is." "You mentioned the old chapel, the stories." Clara wrung her hands, her gaze darting towards the library's windows, towards the fog that obscured the street. "They were just stories. Rumors my grandmother used to tell me to keep me away from that part of town. She said the chapel that stood there wasn't a church of God. She called them the Congregation of the Silent Gaze. Said they didn't use a Bible, they used bowls of polished silver and black glass to pray." "Pray to what?" "She never said a name. Just that it was a thing that lived on the other side of Reflections. A hungry thing. They said the congregation vanished all at once, back in the 1800s. After that, no one would build on the land. Not until Varnholt came." A cold dread settled in my stomach. The shop wasn't just built on the site. It was a continuation. "Is there anything else?" I pressed. "Records? Town hall archives?" Clara shook her head, taking a step back. The fear in her eyes was now mixed with a firm resolve. "I can't. I'm sorry, Alex. I've told you more than I should have. These are old, settled things. You stir them up, and they notice who's doing the stirring. I have a family here. I can't get involved." She pointed me towards the town records office but made it clear that was as far as she would go. Her fear was a wall between us. I was on my own. Chapter 12, I returned to the shop feeling more isolated than ever. Clara's fear was more damning than any ghost story. It was real, tangible, and it had pushed me away. My mind was a chaotic storm of silent gazes and screaming reflections. I worked on autopilot, my movements clumsy, my thoughts a million miles away. The neighboring antique shop was having its floors refinished, and the sharp scent of varnish mingled with the shop's own strange odor. Their cleaning supplies, including a large, galvanized bucket of murky water, had been left just inside our shared back entrance. It was an accident born of distraction. I was backing away from a mirror I thought had flickered, my nerves shot. I didn't see the bucket. My heel caught the rusty handle, and the world tilted into slow motion. The bucket tipped, and a great wave of gray, soapy water sloshed across the floorboards, and onto a row of dusty, turn-of-the-century cheval mirrors. Rule number 7. Do not clean the mirrors with water or glass cleaner. Use only the special polish, or you'll awaken what's trapped inside. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. It wasn't a sound, but the feeling of a sound, a psychic scream that tore through my mind. The surfaces of the drenched mirrors didn't crack, they writhed. The reflections within warped and twisted, stretching into silent, agonized shapes. The air temperature plummeted, and a chorus of whispers erupted from the glass, 1,000 voices speaking at once in a cacophony of pain and rage. Awake. Cold. Free. C. U.S. C. I was huddled on the floor, hands over my ears, but the whispers were inside my head. Then, as quickly as it began, a new presence silenced it. Mr. Varnholt stood in the doorway to the back room. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the twitching, screaming mirrors. His usual calm was gone, replaced by an expression of cold, absolute fury. He held a bottle of the milky polish in one hand, and with the other, he made a slow, deliberate gesture in the air. The whispers died. The reflections stilled. The light steadied. The silence that fell was more profound and terrifying than the noise it replaced. You foolish child, Varnholt breathed, his voice dangerously soft. He strode forward, his eyes like black ice. He didn't check on me. He went straight to the mirrors, dabbing the thick, white polish onto their surfaces with a reverence that made my skin crawl. With each application, the oppressive energy seemed to recede, soothed and pacified. I expected him to fire me, to throw me out. Instead, when he was done, he turned to me, my pathetic form still trembling on the floor. Clean up your mess, he ordered, his voice flat. And do not make that mistake again. The fact that I still had a job was, somehow, the most terrifying thing of all. I was no longer just an employee. I was part of the experiment. And I had just proven myself to be a very interesting variable. Chapter 13, the water incident had torn a hole in the fabric of the shop. The whispers were no longer a rare, terrifying event, they were a constant, insidious chorus. They layered over the silence, a sibilant static just at the edge of hearing. The entity had been awakened, and it was now focused on me with an obsessive intensity. It used my grief as a scalpel. Alex. It was her voice. The voice of the woman from the accident. Not a whisper, but a clear, perfect memory of her voice, laced with an echo of static. Why didn't you swerve, Alex? I would be polishing a mirror, and her face would flash in the glass for a split second, not screaming, but smiling, the way she did right before the impact. The mirrors started showing me scenes. Not ghosts, but memories, twisted and weaponized. The reflection of a twisted guardrail in a silver vanity mirror. The intricate, spiderweb pattern of the shattered windshield appearing on the surface of a large pure glass. My dreams became its playground. I was perpetually trapped in the passenger seat of the car, but the windows weren't glass. They were mirrors. And in them, I didn't see the oncoming truck. I saw Samuel Jones's screaming face, the vanishing customer from the shop, a congregation of figures with black voids for eyes. And in the rearview mirror, Mr. Varnholt was watching, his expression unreadable. I'd wake up screaming, the smell of ozone and burnt rubber in my nostrils that I was coming apart. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. My apartment became a fortress of covered mirrors and drawn blinds. The world outside the shop was losing its reality, its colors bleeding into the same oppressive gray as the fog of Port Blossom. The entity was no longer just trying to scare me. It was trying to break me down, to hollow me out. It was a campaign of psychological warfare, and it was winning. It whispered promises in her voice, telling me it could fix what was broken, that it could show me her again, truly show me her. All I had to do was ask. All I had to do was look deeper. All I had to do was give in. Chapter 14. I found Tucker near the docks, mending a fishing net with gnarled, unsteady hands. He smelled of brine and cheap whiskey. He looked up as I approached, his wild eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You again," he grunted. "The glass-eyed ghost. Ain't they eaten you yet?" "Not yet," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you. About Samuel Jones." He flinched at the name and turned his back to me. "Got nothing to say. Leave an old man be. Please," I begged, my desperation overriding my pride. "You said you were his friend. I see him. In the mirrors. The shop is, it's happening to me now." "What happened to him?" Tucker stopped his work. He was silent for a long time, staring out at the gray, churning water. Finally, he let out a long, weary sigh. "Sammy wasn't like me," he began, his voice raspy with memory. "He was a good kid. A bit lost, you know. Family didn't treat him right. He was lonely. That's what the shop looks for. It finds the cracks in you and pours itself in." He turned to face me, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient pain. "He took the job for the money, just like you, I reckon. But then he started to change. He'd talk about the mirrors, but not like they were glass. He said they were, listening. That they were showing him things. A world without pain," he said. "A world where he wasn't lonely." "What did he see?" "He called it, the man in the glass. Said it was a version of him, but better. Smarter. Stronger. It offered him things. Knowledge. Power. All he had to do was trust it. I told him he was going crazy. I told him to quit. But he was mesmerized. He said Varnholt was helping him, teaching him how to see properly." Tucker's voice dropped to a whisper. "The last time I saw him, his eyes had that look. The one you're starting to get. Like he was looking at the world through a window, from a long way away. He said he was going to do it. That he was going to step through. He walked into that shop, and that was it. He never came out. I waited all night. He was gone." He poked a finger at my chest. "That place ain't a shop. It's a lure. A sticky trap for souls. It promises you whatever you want most, shows you whatever you lost. And when it's got you, it swallows you whole. You ain't fighting a ghost, kid. You're fighting a hook that's already in your cheek." Chapter 15. Tucker's story echoed in my mind, a death knell. It finds the cracks in you. My own crack, my grief, my guilt, was a chasm, and the entity was pouring itself in. That I was in the shop the next day, moving in a haze of sleepless dread. The whispers were a constant, murmuring tide. The reflections flickered with images of my past. I felt a pressure building, a sense of imminence, as if the entire shop was holding its breath. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with static electricity. That I looked up, and I saw the void. That it was a large, rococo mirror I had polished 100 times, its frame a gaudy explosion of gilded vines and cherubs. But now, the glass held nothing. It wasn't black, it wasn't dark. It was simply, empty. It did not reflect the aisle in front of it, the opposite wall, or the dusty chandelier above. It did not reflect me, standing less than 5 feet away. It was a blank, perfect hole in the world, a patch of reality that had been seamlessly and utterly erased. Rule number 8. If you see a mirror with no reflection at all, leave the shop immediately and do not return until the next day. It means the entity is watching. This was a different kind of fear. It wasn't the shock of a ghostly apparition or the terror of a whisper. This was a profound, cosmic dread, the paralyzing horror of looking upon something so fundamentally wrong, so alien to the laws of physics and reason, that my mind buckled. It wasn't just watching. It was present. It was looking out that I didn't need to be told twice. I dropped my cloth and fled. I didn't run, I bolted. I burst out of the front door into the gray afternoon, the bell chiming frantically behind me. I didn't stop until I was several blocks away, panting, hands on my knees, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. For the first time, I had fled the shop in broad daylight, a stark admission of defeat. The entity no longer needed shadows and whispers. It could now bend reality to its will, and it wanted me to know it. Chapter 16. I didn't return to the shop the next day. I couldn't. The image of the void mirror was seared into my brain. Instead, driven by a terror that had finally burned through my apathy, I went to the Port Blossom Town Hall. The records office was a stuffy, basement room manned by a clerk who looked at me with profound boredom. Remembering what Clara had said about the Congregation of the Silent Gaze, I asked for deeds and records pertaining to the land where the shop now stood, dating back to the town's founding. After an hour of digging through brittle, foxed paper, I found it. A leather-bound journal, its pages filled with the spidery script of the town's first pastor, the Reverend Thaddeus Hale. Most of it was standard clerical fare, baptisms, sermons, and complaints about the weather. But then I found the entries I was looking for. October 12, 1868, a shadow has fallen over our flock. A heretical sect has taken root, led by a man who calls himself the Reflector. They do not worship our Lord, but conduct their rites on the bluffs where the old chapel once stood. They do not gather in prayer, but in silent contemplation of polished glass and silver, which they call windows to the other. November 3, 1868, the heresy spreads. They speak of a formless, silent God, a presence that exists beyond the veil of sight. They claim it feeds not on prayer or sacrifice, but on likenesses. They believe that by offering one's reflection to this entity, one can achieve a form of immortality, a union with the eternal gaze. This is blasphemy of the highest order. December 1, 1868, I confronted the Reflector today. His eyes were like polished stones. He claimed his God was the true God of this place, an ancient consciousness that the fog itself serves. He said they were preparing to open the gate. I fear for the souls of this town. The final entry was dated a week later. The handwriting was shaky, panicked. December 8, 1868, they are gone. All of them. The entire congregation. Vanished overnight. Their meeting place on the bluff is empty, save for a single, large piece of polished obsidian, cold to the touch. It reflects nothing. It is a hole in the world. God save us. We have built our town on the threshold of damnation. That I sat back, the journal open in my lap, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Varnholt wasn't just a shop owner. He was the Reflector. Or his successor. The shop wasn't a business, it was a temple. The mirrors were the altars, the special polish a sacrament. And the customers, the vanished employees, Samuel, Eleanor, we weren't staff. We were potential sacrifices. The shop was designed to find a soul cracked enough, desperate enough, to willingly offer its likeness and open the gate. Chapter 17. The knowledge didn't arm me, it crippled me. The entity was not a ghost trapped in a mirror, it was a God, and the shop was its church. And its power was no longer confined by the shop's walls. The invasion began subtly. I'd see a flash of Eleanor Vance's tired, sad face reflected in a puddle on the sidewalk. My toaster, polished chrome, would show the reflection of my kitchen, but with the chairs overturned and the cupboards open. I'd glance at the black screen of my phone and see the face of Samuel Jones staring back, his mouth open in his eternal, silent scream. My small apartment, once a refuge, became a new chamber of horrors. The towel I'd taped over the bathroom mirror was ripped down one night, though I lived alone and the door was locked. I woke up to find it on the floor, and my reflection in the glass was crying, though my own face was dry. Objects began to move. My keys wouldn't be where I left them. A book would be open to a page I hadn't read. The entity was actively rewriting my reality, blurring the edges, making me doubt my own senses. Was the chair out of place, or was my memory failing? Was that a face in the reflection, or just a trick of the light? The gaslighting was constant, relentless, and brutally effective. My sanity, already a fraying thread, was unraveling stitch by stitch. I felt myself becoming a ghost in my own life, a likeness losing its connection to the original. Chapter 18. After 3 days of this relentless torment, something inside me broke. The fear didn't vanish, but it crystallized into something hard and sharp: rage. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. The only path left was through that. I stormed back to reflections eternal, the bell heralding my arrival like a trumpet of war. The shop was silent, waiting. Mr. Varnholt was standing in the center of the room, as if he'd been expecting me. "It has to stop," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Does it?" Varnholt replied, his tone one of mild curiosity. He seemed different. The mask of the quiet shopkeeper was gone, replaced by an ancient, predatory stillness. "I would have thought you were beginning to appreciate the truth of things." "What are you?" I demanded. "A priest? A servant?" "I am a curator," he said, a thin smile gracing his lips. "A keeper of the glass. As was my father before me, and his before him. We tend the altars. We seek the one who is worthy." "Worthy of what?" "To be the next ghost in the machine. To be eaten like Samuel and Eleanor." Varnholt actually chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Eaten? Oh, no. You misunderstand. They weren't eaten. They were rejected. They were flawed vessels. They looked into the glass and saw only what they wanted, an escape from their pathetic little lives. They lacked the strength to see what is truly there. They broke. The entity has no use for broken things." He glided closer, his obsidian eyes boring into me. "But you are different. You have seen the void and did not go mad. You have weathered the whispers. You have felt its direct gaze. You have a resilience they lacked. You are not a sheep to be slaughtered. You are a candidate." "A candidate for what?" I spat. "For the Union. To become the eye of the storm. The anchor that allows the entity to fully manifest on this side of the glass. To open the gate." He gestured toward the shrouded back room. Its heart beat stronger now. It has been dormant for a century, but it is awakening. It requires a new reflector. He stopped in front of me, his presence overwhelming. "You have two choices, Alex. You can flee this town and spend the rest of your short, miserable life looking over your shoulder, seeing its gaze in every puddle, every window, every lover's eye, until your mind corrodes to nothing. Or, you can accept your purpose. You can step through the looking glass and become part of something eternal, something divine." He let the choice hang in the air, a sentence of doom either way. "The large oval mirror," I whispered, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. "It's not a portal, it's the gate." Mr. Varnholt's smile widened. It was a terrifying, triumphant thing. It is the heart of our God. And it is beginning to open. The choice is yours, Alex. But you must choose soon. A God does not like to be kept waiting. December 8, 1868, they are gone. All of them. The entire congregation. Vanished overnight. Their meeting place on the bluff is empty, save for a single, large piece of polished obsidian, cold to the touch. It reflects nothing. It is a hole in the world. God save us. We have built our town on the threshold of damnation. That I sat back, the journal open in my lap, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Varnholt wasn't just a shop owner. He was the reflector. Or his successor. The shop wasn't a business, it was a temple. The mirrors were the altars, the special polish a sacrament. And the customers, the vanished employees, Samuel, Eleanor, we weren't staff. We were potential sacrifices. The shop was designed to find a soul cracked enough, desperate enough, to willingly offer its likeness and open the gate. Chapter 17. The knowledge didn't arm me, it crippled me. The entity was not a ghost trapped in a mirror, it was a God, and the shop was its church. And its power was no longer confined by the shop's walls. The invasion began subtly. I'd see a flash of Eleanor Vance's tired, sad face reflected in a puddle on the sidewalk. My toaster, polished chrome, would show the reflection of my kitchen, but with the chairs overturned and the cupboards open. I'd glance at the black screen of my phone and see the face of Samuel Jones staring back, his mouth open in his eternal, silent scream. My small apartment, once a refuge, became a new chamber of horrors. The towel I'd taped over the bathroom mirror was ripped down one night, though I lived alone and the door was locked. I woke up to find it on the floor, and my reflection in the glass was crying, though my own face was dry. Objects began to move. My keys wouldn't be where I left them. A book would be open to a page I hadn't read. The entity was actively rewriting my reality, blurring the edges, making me doubt my own senses. Was the chair out of place, or was my memory failing? Was that a face in the reflection, or just a trick of the light? The gaslighting was constant, relentless, and brutally effective. My sanity, already a fraying thread, was unraveling stitch by stitch. I felt myself becoming a ghost in my own life, a likeness losing its connection to the original. Chapter 18. After 3 days of this relentless torment, something inside me broke. The fear didn't vanish, but it crystallized into something hard and sharp, rage. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. The only path left was through. I stormed back to reflections eternal, the bell heralding my arrival like a trumpet of war. The shop was silent, waiting. Mr. Varnholt was standing in the center of the room, as if he'd been expecting me. It has to stop, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Does it? Varnholt replied, his tone one of mild curiosity. He seemed different. The mask of the quiet shopkeeper was gone, replaced by an ancient, predatory stillness. I would have thought you were beginning to appreciate the truth of things. What are you? I demanded. A priest? A servant? I am a curator, he said, a thin smile gracing his lips. A keeper of the glass. As was my father before me, and his before him. We tend the altars. We seek the one who is worthy. Worthy of what? To be the next ghost in the machine. To be eaten like Samuel and Eleanor. Varnholt actually chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Eaten? Oh, no. You misunderstand. They weren't eaten. They were rejected. They were flawed vessels. They looked into the glass and saw only what they wanted, an escape from their pathetic little lives. They lacked the strength to see what is truly there. They broke. The entity has no use for broken things. He glided closer, his obsidian eyes boring into me. But you are different. You have seen the void and did not go mad. You have weathered the whispers. You have felt its direct gaze. You have a resilience they lacked. You are not a sheep to be slaughtered. You are a candidate. A candidate for what? I spat, for the Union. To become the eye of the storm. The anchor that allows the entity to fully manifest on this side of the glass. To open the gate. He gestured toward the shrouded back room. Its heart beat stronger now. It has been dormant for a century, but it is awakening. It requires a new reflector. He stopped in front of me, his presence overwhelming. You have two choices, Alex. You can flee this town and spend the rest of your short, miserable life looking over your shoulder, seeing its gaze in every puddle, every window, every lover's eye, until your mind corrodes to nothing. Or, you can accept your purpose. You can step through the looking glass and become part of something eternal, something divine. He let the choice hang in the air, a sentence of doom either way. The large oval mirror, I whispered, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. It's not a portal, it's the gate. Mr. Varnholt's smile widened. It was a terrifying, triumphant thing. It is the heart of our God. And it is beginning to open. The choice is yours, Alex. But you must choose soon. A God does not like to be kept waiting. Chapter 19. Varnholt's offer hung in the air of the shop, as thick and suffocating as the fog outside. It was not a choice between freedom and servitude, but between two different kinds of damnation. Flee and be haunted, or stay and become the haunter. The entity, the silent god of the glass, had already won. It had laid the board, and every square was a trap. That I stood there, the curator's obsidian eyes fixed on me, and felt something shift. The terror that had hollowed me out for weeks did not vanish. Instead, it collapsed inward, pressurizing into a single, dense point of cold, clear rage. The fear had been a tool of paralysis. The anger was a key. That I thought of Samuel Jones's silent scream, of Eleanor Vance's tired face, of the life stolen from the woman in the car with me. The entity didn't just feed on likenesses, it fed on despair. It consumed souls that had already given up. That I would not give up. If I was going to be damned, I would be damned for fighting back. I'll think about it, I lied, my voice surprisingly steady. Varnholt's thin smile was one of triumph. He believed he had broken me. There is no rush, he said, gliding back toward his shadowed alcove. Eternity can wait an evening. I left the shop, my mind racing. I couldn't run, and I wouldn't join. That left a third option, the one that hadn't been offered, destruction. I had to kill the god. How do you kill a thing that isn't alive? How do you fight a shadow? The answer, I realized, had been in my hands the entire time. The 8 rules. They weren't just Varnholt's commandments to keep his employees safe and the entity placated. They were the entity's weaknesses, translated into a user manual. Rule 7, do not clean the mirrors with water, or you'll awaken what's trapped inside. Water didn't just clean, it was an irritant, an agitation. It was anathema. Rule 3, if a mirror shows a reflection that isn't yours, cover it immediately with the black cloth. The cloth didn't just hide the reflection, it blinded the mirror, severing its connection. It was a weapon of sensory deprivation. Rule 2, do not touch the antique mirrors with bare hands. Their surfaces are unnaturally cold. The cold was a symptom of its power, a leaching of warmth and life. What, then, was its opposite? Heat. Fire. The final plan began to form in my mind, a desperate, suicidal gambit. The entity's heart was the great oval mirror in the back room. To destroy it, I would have to break every rule I could. I wouldn't just agitate it. I would declare all-out war. Chapter 20. My first stop was the hardware store at the edge of town. The fluorescent lights and aisles of mundane tools felt like a different universe. I bought a heavy, 10-pound sledgehammer and a canister of lighter fluid. The cashier gave me a strange look, but in a town like Port Blossom, eccentricity was hardly noteworthy. Next, I went to the docks. Under the cloak of the evening fog, I filled 3 large plastic containers with seawater, the brine stinging my hands. It felt ancient, raw, and real in a way the sterile polish of the shop never did. This was the water of the world, not the water of the tap. If the entity was anathema to water, I would drown it in the ocean itself. My final stop was the library. It was closed, but I knew Clara sometimes worked late. I saw a light on in her office and knocked on the glass of the back door. She opened it, her face etched with fear when she saw me. "Alex, you can't be here," she whispered, trying to shut the door. "I'm not asking for your help, Clara," I said, holding the door open. "I just need one thing. The black cloths from the storeroom in the shop. They're velvet, right?" I think so." "Why?" "Because I need more," I said. "The heaviest, blackest cloth you have. The kind that light can't get through." She saw the look in my eyes, the terrifying certainty that had replaced my fear. She knew I wasn't running. She hesitated, then wordlessly led me to a back room where the library stored old promotional materials. In the corner was a heavy, folded backdrop for a long-forgotten puppet show. It was made of thick, light-devouring black velvet. It was perfect. "Alex, whatever you're planning, don't," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "You can't win." "I'm not trying to win," I said, hoisting the heavy bundle. "I'm just trying to end the game." I left her standing in the doorway, a final, fleeting connection to the world I was about to leave behind forever. I was armed with the profane and the sacred, the modern and the ancient, a sledgehammer, lighter fluid, seawater, and a swatch of endless night. Chapter 21. I returned to reflections eternal long after midnight. The streets of Port Blossom were deserted, swallowed by fog and silence. As I approached, I could feel the shop's power pulsing into the street, a low, psychic thrum that promised violence. This was a deliberate violation of rule number 1. I was looking into the abyss after hours, and I was inviting it to look back. The door was unlocked. Inside, the shop was transformed. The air was electric, and the surfaces of every mirror rippled like dark water. The reflections within were no longer still, they writhed, shifting between my own likeness and the tormented faces of the lost. The whispers were a deafening roar in my mind, a symphony of threats and promises. Varnholt stood waiting for me by the entrance to the back room. He was not wearing his threadbare suit, but a simple, dark robe that looked impossibly ancient. "I knew you would return," he said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded disappointed. "You have chosen defiance. A foolish, fleeting gesture. Your family has been feeding this thing for generations," I said, dropping my arsenal to the floor. "Why?" "For power." A flicker of pain crossed his face, the first genuine emotion I had ever seen from him. "Not for power. For survival. My ancestor, the first reflector, did not make a pact. He was a prisoner. He sought knowledge and found damnation. The entity bound our bloodline to it. Each generation must provide a curator to tend the glass and find a willing successor. If the line of curators is broken, the entity will consume the likenesses of our entire family, tracing us back through history, erasing us from memory and existence. I do this not to serve a god, but to stop my children, my parents, my entire history from being utterly annihilated." He looked at me, his obsidian eyes filled with a terrible weariness. "I chose you because I thought you were strong enough to take my place. To finally grant me the release of oblivion. Instead, you bring this." He gestured to the sledgehammer. "The game ends tonight," I said, grabbing the hammer. "So it does," he replied, and the shop exploded into chaos. Mirrors flew from the walls. The floorboards buckled. A wave of psychic force slammed into me, throwing me back. Varnholt moved with an unnatural speed, his form blurring at the edges. We didn't trade blows, we traded willpower. He hurled reflections at me, images of my own death, of my deepest failures. I fought back, focusing on the rules, on the entity's weaknesses, using them as a shield. The oval mirror in the back room began to glow, an impossible light that was not light, but a visible concentration of darkness. It was uncovered, waiting. The heart was beating. As I scrambled toward it, Varnholt intercepted me. He grabbed my arm, his touch as cold as the antique glass. "You will take my place," he screamed, his voice mingling with the whispers of the mirrors. "Never." I roared, and using all my strength, I shoved him away from me and lunged headfirst towards the shimmering, dark portal. If I was going in, I was going in on my own terms. I crossed the threshold, and the world dissolved. Chapter 22, Passing through the mirror was not like walking through a door. It was an inversion. My senses turned inside out. The feeling of air in my lungs was replaced by the feeling of my lungs being in the air. Sound became taste, sight became a physical pressure against my skin. My very identity, the solid core of Alex, felt like it was unraveling, the threads of my consciousness being pulled apart. That I landed on a surface that was neither solid nor liquid, a floor of shifting, grayscale patterns. I was in the entity's realm. The glass labyrinth that it was a nightmare of impossible geometry. Corridors made of solidified memories stretched in all directions, their walls composed of countless mirrors. But these mirrors didn't reflect me. They reflected possibilities, alternate realities, fears made manifest. One showed me growing old and alone in Port Blossom, a vacant-eyed ghost like Old Man Tucker. Another showed me accepting Varnholt's offer, my eyes black and empty like his. A third showed the truck hitting our car head-on, over and over, a looped snuff film of my greatest failure. The entity's presence was everywhere, a crushing, silent intelligence. It didn't need to speak. It communicated by peeling back the layers of my mind and showing me the ugliness within. Distorted reflections of myself peeled away from the walls and shambled toward me. They were the physical embodiment of my self-doubt, my guilt, my fear. One whispered in her voice, its face contorted in a mask of loving disappointment. Another was me from the moment after the crash, covered in blood that wasn't mine, screaming accusations. And in the walls of the labyrinth, I saw them. Samuel Jones and Eleanor Vance. They were not ghosts. They were living frescoes, their likenesses trapped in an eternal, looping moment of terror. Samuel was forever turning to see me in the octagonal mirror. Eleanor was forever looking up from her work, her face a mask of dawning realization. They were the entity's sustenance, their despair a rich, endless meal. This, I realized, was the core of its power. It didn't just kill you. It unmade you. It deconstructed your identity, your very soul, until all that was left was a likeness, a perfect reflection of your worst moment, and it fed on that echo for eternity. Chapter 23, The assault was relentless. The labyrinth shifted, forcing me to confront the epicenter of my trauma, the accident. I was no longer an observer, I was inside it. The world outside the car windows was a swirling vortex of screaming faces and shattered glass. You could have saved her, the entity projected, its thought a physical blow. It showed me 1,000 different choices I could have made, each one leading to her survival and my death. It offered me the trade. Give up my life, my likeness, and she could live. The temptation was absolute. My guilt was a cancer, and the entity was offering me the cure of self-sacrifice. The distorted reflections of my fear and sorrow closed in, their hands reaching for me, ready to pull me apart, but as I looked at the memory of her face, twisted by the entity into a tool of torment, something else rose within me. Not rage this time. Acceptance. The accident was a fact. My failure was a fact. My grief was a fact. They were part of me, scars that had shaped who I was. To deny them, to trade them away, would be to let the entity win. It fed on fractured selves. The only way to fight it was to be whole. No, I said, my voice echoing in the non-space. I looked at the reflection of my grief, the one wearing her face. It wasn't your fault, I whispered to it. It was mine. And I have to live with that. I pushed through the phantoms. As I accepted my own fractured past, they lost their substance. Their power was derived from my denial. My acceptance starved them. They dissolved into gray smoke, and the path forward cleared that I had found the one weapon that worked in this realm. Not a hammer, not water, but a complete, unbroken sense of self. Ahead, the labyrinth opened into a vast, empty sphere. At its center hung a perfect orb of absolute nothingness. It was the void from the mirror, the heart of the entity, the source of the silence and the hunger. And floating before it, his form translucent and unraveling, was Varnholt. He was being absorbed, his likeness dissolving into the orb. It's too late, he rasped, his voice a distant echo. It is awake. It requires a heart. It requires a core. Take my place. It is your only escape. This was the final test. To become the monster, to escape the monster's belly. My name is Alex, I said, the words a shield. And I am not you. Chapter 24, the time for psychological warfare was over. I focused, pulling the memory of my physical weapons into the psychic space. I pictured the sledgehammer, heavy and real in my hands. The containers of seawater. The roll of black velvet that I hurled the seawater at the orb. The void recoiled as if struck, a silent, psychic shriek echoing through the realm. The water, a symbol of life and chaos, was poisoned to its sterile nothingness. Fissures of light, like cracks in black ice, appeared across its surface. Varnholt screamed as the void's hold on him weakened. What are you doing? You will destroy us all. I manifested the heavy velvet cloth. It unfurled like the wings of a great black bird and I threw it over the orb. The moment it made contact, the entire realm plunged into a deeper, more profound darkness. The entity's senses, its ability to perceive, reflect, and mimic, were blinded. The crushing pressure of its intelligence vanished, replaced by a confused, frantic energy. This was my chance that I gripped the sledgehammer, its weight a comforting reality in this nightmare. With a roar that was part grief, part rage, and part pure, defiant life, I swung. The impact made no sound, but the universe screamed. Reality didn't just crack, it shattered. The glass labyrinth imploded. The orb of nothingness broke apart, not into pieces, but into an explosion of screaming, frantic reflections. I saw the entire history of the shop flash before my eyes, the congregation, the first reflector, every customer, every victim that I felt myself being hurled backward, expelled from the dying realm as it collapsed in on itself. The last thing I saw was Varnholt's face, his eyes wide not with fear, but with a look of profound, grateful release as his form dissolved completely into the shattering light. Chapter 25, I slammed back into my own body, collapsing onto the hard, wooden floor of the back room. The air was filled with the sound of a million panes of glass breaking at once, a deafening, crystalline crescendo that shook the very foundations of the building that I pushed myself up, my ears ringing. Every mirror in the shop, from the smallest pocket glass to the largest pier mirror, was cracked. Some had exploded outward, leaving only frames. Others were covered in intricate spiderwebs of fractures. They were dead. Silent. My eyes went to the great oval mirror, the heart. A single, massive crack ran through its center, a jagged, black wound. From the crack, a thick, dark, resinous substance, like tar, was leaking out, sizzling as it hit the floorboards. The glow was gone. The presence was gone. The entity wasn't dead. I knew, somehow, that a thing like that couldn't die. But its connection to this place, its gateway, had been shattered. It was wounded, blinded, cast back into whatever void it called home. That I was alive. I was whole. I stumbled through the wreckage of the shop, the dead glass crunching under my boots. As I reached the front door, I saw the first, pale light of dawn breaking through the fog. For the first time since I'd arrived in Port Blossom, the sun was visible, a weak but defiant white disk in the sky. The fog was lifting that I walked out of Reflections Eternal, leaving the key in the lock. I didn't look back. I walked through the quiet streets of the waking town, down to the bus station, and bought a one-way ticket to a city whose name I picked at random from the schedule. As the bus pulled away, I watched Port Blossom, a town finally released from its shroud, disappear behind me. Chapter 26. 6 months later, the city is loud, bright, and relentlessly real. I have a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up and a boring, stable job stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store. My world is one of cardboard boxes, expiration dates, and the hum of fluorescent lights. It's heaven. There are no mirrors in my apartment. The bathroom medicine cabinet is a simple wooden door. I use the dark screen of my phone to check if I have anything in my teeth. I avert my eyes from shop windows and the reflective chrome of subway cars. I am free, but the scars remain. I am a woman who is afraid of her own reflection. Sometimes, at night, I dream of the sound of breaking glass. But I am no longer haunted by her voice, or by the face of Samuel Jones. The acceptance I found in that glass hell has become my shield. The past is a part of me, but it no longer defines me. One rainy Tuesday, I'm wiping the condensation from my apartment window to watch the street below. My hand moves in a familiar circular motion, the one I used 1,000 times with the polishing cloth. Force of habit. As the glass clears, I freeze. It's not the sound of a voice. It's the feeling of one, a cold spot forming on the back of my neck, a psychic whisper that bypasses the ears and sinks directly into the mind. Alex, my blood turns to ice. I stare at the window, at my own faint reflection against the rainy cityscape. But as I watch, the reflection of my apartment begins to fade, replaced by another image, faint and ghostly, but unmistakable. I see the dusty, labyrinthine interior of a quiet shop. I see a large, oval mirror against the back wall, its surface dark and still, the great crack across its face looking like a healed-over scar. I see the counter, the shadowy alcove, the silent, waiting chairs, and standing in the center of the room, looking out at me from the other side of my own window, is a gaunt figure in a threadbare suit, his eyes like polished glass. My breath catches in my throat. I haven't just escaped. I haven't just won. When I shattered the heart of the entity, I absorbed a shard of it. I am no longer just a survivor. I am a mirror, and the shop is wherever I am. It is waiting, patiently, for me to open its doors once more.